You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to dig deeper into the legislative session with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Nicole Nixon, reporter with KUER, and Julia Ritchie, senior editor with KUER. Great to have you guys back on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
That year went by fast. That's the last time we had you on, right?
Yeah.
For the preview of the legislature. All right, so a couple of weeks ago I was thinking, this is going to be kind of slow this year.
Super boring.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, everything drops on us.
Right.
So wow, we have a lot to talk about today and what we'll be following over the legislative session. Let's start with abortion, always a hot topic, and we saw some bills come down on that. Nicole, let's start with you. Set us up with what we're looking at as far as abortion and restrictions.
So I think, first of all, we need to talk about the Supreme Court. And with Trump's election and Brett Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court, now we're seeing that shift to the right. And we're seeing a lot of conservative states like Utah, but also Idaho, Missouri, Tennessee. We're seeing proposals like this from conservative states, and they're trying to maybe push the line on abortion and Roe v. Wade a little bit. So in Utah, we have two proposals now. One from Representative Cheryl Acton would restrict abortions after 15 weeks. Another one was a bill that came up last year that didn't make it, from Representative Carrie Ann Lisenby, and that would outlaw abortions if your fetus is diagnosed with Down syndrome, if that's the only reason you want that abortion.
The question is, how much does the legislature want to spend on these? Because these aren't just state laws, these are constitutional challenges.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because most of the discussion is focused on these are going to be challenged. There's no question about it. Even legislative attorneys are looking at this and saying that same thing. So what are we hearing along those lines?
Democrats have already reached out to the legislature's attorneys, and they got guidance back that said this would probably be considered unconstitutional. It could cost $2 million for the Attorney General to defend. Governor Herbert was asked about that today and said some things are worth fighting for. So he seems to be keeping the door open to actually considering these social messaging bills this year, like abortion.
So when we take a look at the 15-week one, it wouldn't be the most strict in the country, but it would be up there for sure. So is that what we're starting to see fuel people and supporters behind this, is saying, look, Mississippi has 12 and we're not going that far? Is that also what we're seeing
They're
happen?
trying to build this domino effect, right? So that if they get enough court cases together, they band together, finally the Supreme Court says, okay, we're going to take a look at Roe v. Wade again now that we have this sort of right-leaning court, and we'll see what happens. So I know Representative Acton would like to see this return to a states' rights issue. So
Nicole, to your point, where we're starting to see, the ball roll and conservative states get into this movement, what do we see as far as this likely passing the legislative session? Because you already brought up Representative Lisenby's bill last year did not make it through.
I think the fact that it didn't make it through last year makes it a little more likely this year. I think there were some questions at the very end there where it didn't come up for a vote. It already has a Senate sponsor, so maybe they feel like those questions have been answered and they feel more good about it passing this year. And again, that's that question of, they know this will likely be challenged in court if it passes. The question is, the legislature's okay with it if it passes. It's up to the courts to defend it when it does.
And to your point, when the governor said some things are worth fighting for, he wouldn't necessarily go on the record and say, that's my point of view, but he put it out there in case it does get to his desk. So we'll see how that plays out. Hate crimes have been a huge discussion in the state of Utah for a long time. We've had cases this year that have really put that front and center, and then all of a sudden a message from the church. How does that bode for hate crimes legislation?
So Senator Daniel Thatcher has been trying this bill for 2 years. Before that, it was Senator Steve Urquhart's bill. So he says, I can't do anything until the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints gives sort of like a tacit blessing to this piece of legislation, because for so long there were concerns about providing protections for all groups of people, and that included LGBT individuals. But like you said, there's some really high-profile cases this year, like a Hispanic family that was attacked at their place of business, that could really propel this further. And so this week we heard from the church's chief lobbyist, Marty Stevens, was put on the record saying, we're not going to stand in the way of this. And then you saw, again, the governor came out really in force today and said, I think it's time that we make LGBT people feel safe in their communities, and he would actually support hate crimes, strengthening our hate crime statutes.
So do we look at that and say, this is the year?
I think that signal from the church means likely yes. If this is a year that it passes, if it's going to pass, I think this is the year to do it. For a long time, it didn't even get a committee hearing because there was no signal from the church about yes or no. There was this big question mark. So I think with that statement, it makes it a little more likely that, I will get a committee hearing, and probably it seems like a bill everybody would be able to rally behind.
Interesting though is like there is no bill right now. So we have some bills that are numbered, and I just checked.
Because Thatcher wasn't sure if it's not going to come up, how far do I want to go
So maybe
into
he was
it?
taken a little off guard, and so we'll see if that actually gets written into.
This reminds me a little of 2015. I think it was 2015 when we were passing the non-discrimination bill. Going into session, that wasn't even on the table. The church comes out and it was passed that year.
Right.
So maybe seeing that type of effect again this year.
Yeah, and I know that's frustrating to a lot of people when they see that happen, but I mean, these are lobbyists and they work full time and they have the ears of the legislator.
Okay, another big issue we're going to be looking at is dueling transgender bills. Basically, can you or can you not change your birth certificate? Lay it out for us. What are these two bills designed to do?
Right. So this started last year when Senator Todd Weiler had this bill that would streamline the process for if you want to legally change your sex or your gender, to do that, get a court order, do that on all your legal documents. He's been working on that for the past year. It didn't make it last year. And then this last week we saw a bill from Representative Merrill Nelson that would make it so that you are not allowed to change your birth certificate. He's not worried about driver's license. He says you can do that if you want. But he wants to think of birth certificates as historical records. He says if you're born male or female and you change that later in life, fine, but you cannot change it on your birth certificate. And big pushback from LGBT advocates on that one.
And not even LGBT advocates, but even Republican lawmakers as well.
Right. So Senator Weiler, he's done a lot of work on adoption, and he sent out a tweet that said, I don't understand Representative Nelson's logic on this one because we are actively going back and changing birth certificates on things like adoption all the time.
And even the governor, again, coming out pretty unequivocally on that issue as well.
He says, I don't ever want to use the V word ahead of time. He hates to tell you what he might veto, but I mean, I couldn't imagine him actually letting this go through. And he even said in so many words, like, I would work to try and revise this to where it was basically not going to do what he wants to do.
So the words we're seeing even from Republican lawmakers give us an indication this bill could be in trouble.
Definitely, and I think it speaks to this public opinion shift that we've seen. I mean, Herbert was defending our same-sex marriage ban like several years ago, and now the public opinion has moved so to the left on this issue. We're still catching up, and we're still seeing like President Trump's ban on transgender troops in the military. So it's playing out a little bit nationally, and I think that's why you see some discomfort on the state and local level too, but this one doesn't seem to have a lot of support right out of the gate.
Okay, let's move on to one thing. I have about a minute left. Proposition 3, Medicaid expansion. We already know we're going to see a bill trying to modify that. What do we expect to see with that?
Well, we know that Senator Alan Christensen has this proposal to take it back to what the legislature passed last year, which was a cap on enrollment, reinstituting those work requirements, but these come from, we need federal waivers for these. And we talked to the Speaker, Brad Wilson, this last week, and he didn't seem really comfortable with those. He wanted to promise, we'll cover as much as many people as possible, and it helped that the voters spoke loud and clear on that one to raise our taxes to pay for that.
Republicans are worried that we're going to run out of money for the program, even though we approved a sales tax hike to pay for this thing.
Yeah.
So there was some pushback today, and I think the governor spoke to that as well.
Yeah, that was another interesting point from.
He basically was like, I think we should let it go into effect in April, which is when Medicaid expansion will happen, and then let's see how it shakes out, how many people sign up for it. Will, if the state can actually pay for all these additional people on Medicaid.
Okay, we've run out of time. You guys will be podcasting again all
Yes.
session. How can our viewers connect with you guys?
45days.org
is our website,
Yeah.
and we do weekly legislative recaps, and so you can find out wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Thanks for being on the show with us. Appreciate
Thanks
your
for
time.
having us.
You bet. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.